Good morning and welcome to the Cathedral Forum. If I could have your attention, please. I am going to introduce somebody that needs no introduction, so why am I here? I guess because I was asked to be. As the Dean's Warden, and yes, I have a set of keys, and I did let her out, and she is here. From Cell Block 1, Dean Penelope Bridges.
First things that I hope you will learn about me is that I'm very rarely late. But between getting used to right one at the early service and a couple of extra pitches, we ran a little over. Thank you very much. And it is an early morning, so I do need a sip of coffee. Although most of the time I drink tea, on Sunday mornings I give in. Drink coffee because that's what's available. I think someone's giving me a table. Oh, okay, let me get closer to the mic. Is that better? Yes. All right. I can't tell you what a joy these 2 weeks have been since I started my ministry at St. Paul's on, February 24th. The welcome has been extraordinary. From the very beginning of this discernment process, I had the distinct impression that St. Paul's was a very open and welcoming community, and you have certainly delivered on that. I'm deeply grateful for the prayers, the cards, the Facebook messages, the food, the people who came and helped me unpack yesterday and Friday and yesterday as I was moving into my new home, and it feels very good to be settled now and to have somewhere where I'm not going to move from for a long time. So what I want to do this morning is basically tell you the story of my life. It feels very self-indulgent, but I gather that's what people would like to know in 50 minutes or less, but also leave some time for you to ask me questions. My life is an open book. I will try my best to answer any question. Perhaps if it's completely beyond the bounds, my warden, where is he? Could go, might have a word, or my head verger, who I saw over there. Did you bring your verge, Lisa? Use it to good effect. So, to start at the beginning, I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. My family, going back way before the beginning, my family, the Fitzgibbon family shield, so everybody knows this is my mug. Has a long documented history. The younger son, who was in Genoa, the family was in Genoa, and the younger son, who wasn't going to inherit anything, signed on as a mercenary with William the Conqueror. So we go back a bit. And was given lands in Ireland as a reward, and my family has been in Ireland ever since. But we still distinguish ourselves by being Norman Irish. It's amazing what long memories the Irish have and how we divide up. So my father's job took him to Belfast before I was born. His family was a Southern Irish family. And so I happened to be born in Belfast. The family is long, many generations Anglican, Church of Ireland. I had a great-grandfather who was Archbishop of Dublin, and that's the last time there was anyone of the cloth in the family. So we attended the Cathedral of St. Anne in Belfast. That's where I was baptised, and my father was a lay reader. And some of my earliest memories centre around the church, and also around music, because as you will learn if you don't already know, music is my avocation. I have a memory of being held in someone's arms and looking up at the roof of the baptistry at St. Anne's. It's a separate space, octagonal, with a dome. It's dark blue with stars in it, and I remember that impression. I also remember, a little bit older, I was allowed to stand on the chair to see what was going on, and I remember standing on the chair during the canticle, the morning canticle, and glaring at the choir of men and boys. And being most upset that I couldn't join in. I remember reading the music in the hymnal before I could read the words. I remember at the age of 3 being taken to a performance of Benjamin Britten's children's opera, Noah's Flood, and being utterly entranced. And what I don't remember, but my older siblings tell me, I'm the youngest of 4, is that I begged my mother until she took me to all the other performances too. And to be a part of a production of Noah's Flood became a bucket list item, a lifelong ambition. It took 50 years to achieve that ambition, and more of that later. When I was 3, I apparently screamed until they got me a violin. My mother was a very fine violinist, and everyone in the family played an instrument. And so they got me a tin violin that I couldn't destroy. And when I was 5, I was given a wooden violin, quarter size, and I started lessons with a teacher rather than just learning from my mother. And so I pursued the violin, started playing in orchestras when I was 7, and have very fond memories of those early youth orchestras. And then when I was 12, I decided to try the viola. At this point, my father was 59 and had just retired from Guinness's. He sold Guinness for a living, very Irish thing to do. And the day that was appointed for my first viola lesson, as it happened, was March 15th, the Ides of March, and my mother picked me up from school. And I asked about going to a concert that night, and she said no, which was very unusual. She normally encouraged everything musical. And I asked why, and it turned out that my father had died that morning, rather unexpectedly from an embolism. So our life changed. We didn't go to the cathedral quite as much. I joined a mixed choir at a Presbyterian church. I did have that first viola lesson, by the way. And it very quickly became evident that the viola was my instrument. And in that first year, my mother bought me a rather nice instrument, which I still play. It's part of the family now. It's not a negotiable asset. And then 2 years later, or actually a year later, my mother developed cancer. And just under 2 years after my father died, my mother died. There was a gap. I was signed up to go to a boarding school in England, but there was a 6-week gap between until I could start there, the 3rd trimester. And so I had my first experience that I remember of truly Christian charity at that point. The house was sold, my older siblings had all moved to the mainland of Britain. And the Dean of Belfast Cathedral, Sammy Crooks, and his wife Isabel, took me in and had me stay with them for those 6 weeks. And I've often thought about what it must have been like for them. They were probably in their 50s then, their children were gone. To have this 14-year-old who they didn't know what could happen. You know, I could have reacted and acted out in any kind of way. And remarkable that they gave me somewhere to live, they loved me. Until the day came for me to get on the ferry and go to England and start a completely new life. Complete, cut off, no home to go back to, a boarding school, a co-ed school, Wells Cathedral School, which is the longest lived cathedral school, in fact school, I think, in the United Kingdom, and one of the very oldest in Europe. And so I arrived at Wells, which my mother and I had chosen together because of its music program, and learned, to my surprise, that I had brains. Nobody had ever told me I was bright. And I started being more interested in academia, and music took a little bit of a backseat, but I continued to play and to sing. Wells was a revelation. It was the Church of Ireland is a very low church. It's a tiny church in a Catholic country and has to define itself as not Catholic. Wells had incense and Gothic splendor. It's a really beautiful cathedral, and not just because I'm biased. We had something called High Mass on Ascension Day and St. Andrew's Day, because it was the Cathedral of St. Andrew, and I'd never experienced worship that was so beautiful. Now, of course, it was still men and boys in the choir, but we did have a school choral society where girls sang, and so I was privileged to sing at the cathedral and even to play organ a couple of times at evensong, but I'm a really bad organist, so that's not something I'm going to be repeating. In due course, I had to decide on a university, and I applied to Cambridge because that's where my father had gone, although I couldn't go to the college he had attended. It was men only. I applied to Clare College, which was one of the first 3 to go co-ed in the early 70s. So Wells Cathedral School had boys for 1,000 years and girls for 2 when I arrived. And there was a wonderful adjustment going on in the life of the school. Clare College, Cambridge, had men for 650 years, because we celebrated that my first semester, and women for 4. So there started to be a pattern developing in my life of sort of elbowing my way into things that had been male preserves in ancient tradition. I was fortunate enough to be granted a choral scholarship at Clare College. John Rutter was the director of music at the time. It was a mixed blessing. We've both grown up a lot since then. That's all I can say. But I did spend a great deal of my time at Cambridge doing music. I started out reading archaeology and anthropology and changed to music after a year. I once figured out that I averaged playing 3 concerts a week throughout my 3 years at Cambridge. And there's the rehearsals as well, of course. So I'm not sure when I slept or did any academic work. But I played just about everything in the orchestral repertoire. Following Cambridge, I didn't get a very good degree, by the way, but I got a degree. I spent a year at the British Library, discerning whether I might want to be a librarian and deciding probably not. However, I'd been involved in some research that involved doing logic tests, aptitude tests, and the researcher who had been doing that work suggested I might look into computer programming because I was good at the logical stuff and I had languages and I was a musician. And sure enough, computer programming suited me and I went on to do that work for about 12, 13, 15 years. And the software company where I worked in London was where I met Steve, who was to be my husband, a Yorkshireman, very brilliant man. And we moved to Yorkshire to be near his family. We were married at St. Mary's Church in Garforth, just outside Leeds. And here was my second experience of the church in love and charity. We had a small wedding, we couldn't afford a large one, and we'd only invited a small number of people to the reception. And I walked into the back of the church and it was full. And I sang in the choir at the church, people knew me, and people had just come out to be there for us. And I'll never forget that impression. And the Dean of Belfast Cathedral, Sammy Crooks, came to do the wedding, and he promised me when I was 14 that wherever I was he would marry me in due course, and so he did. That was 1983, and in December of '84, Steve and I were both working as consultants, computer consultants, and we got a call from a friend of Steve's in a place called New Hampshire, which we'd never heard of. I had heard of Vermont because of the movie Holiday Inn, but I'd never heard of New Hampshire. He said that he was working for an insurance company and they liked the way the Brits worked, and so he was calling former colleagues to see if anyone else would like to come out there. And we were offered a 3-month contract extendable for up to a year. And after a brief negotiation, making sure that both of us would get work visas, we thought, well, what an adventure. Let's do this, spend a year in America, see the world, and then come back and settle down in Yorkshire. Well, we arrived at Boston Airport on a January morning in 1980. and nobody had told us about New England winters. So we had to get used to that. We were very homesick at first, but we did adjust after about 6 months and decided we wanted to stay and started the process for a green card. I know that immigration is a huge issue in this area, and I have a slightly unusual perspective for an Anglo because it took us 7 years to get the green card. And that was not unusual. And at the end of the process, they weren't going to give it to us. Having made us go back to London to interview at the American Embassy, they then said, you're not going to get it and you may never go back to the United States. This was after we'd been in the States for 7 years. And we had a house and jobs and the like. Thankfully, after 10 weeks of mulling it over, the State Department relented and did give us our green card because they didn't want our children to be deprived of the benefit of American education. I'm very grateful for that. Very grateful. So, in 1985, New Hampshire, I discovered a church to sing in, Grace Episcopal Church, and was immediately embraced into the family. And yet again, the church reached out to embrace me and my family. My children, my 2 sons were born, Samuel and Thomas, 3 years apart. The clergy are their godparents. I was very involved. I was thinking about running for vestry. I was a delegate to the diocesan convention. And in December of 1992, I had lunch with our associate rector, a young mother like myself, and something happened. Something opened up. This was when my older son was 5, my younger one was 2, and I became aware of an irresistible force dragging me towards ordination. And Chris talked a little bit about how you try to pretend it's a bad cold and it will go away this morning, and it's true. I realized I had been resisting a call to ordination for 5 years. And people around me had noticed and had been saying things to me like, you'd make a good priest, or you should go to seminary and get it over with. The rector's wife had visited my in-laws, whom she'd met in England, and told my mother-in-law, apropos of nothing, that I would eventually be a priest. She didn't tell me. But wisely, people waited for me to realize it for myself. And that really is the essence of Anglican call. That it comes not only from within the individual, but arises out of a community. And I was very embedded in that community. And it was a very wonderful experience, challenging but healthy to go through the ordination aspiration and discernment process. My husband and I negotiated about where I would go to seminary. He wanted initially to stay with the insurance company that he was going to continue working for if he could. This was a company called AIG, I don't suppose you've heard of it. And we settled in the end. We looked at Cambridge, the Episcopal Seminary in Cambridge, Mass, and the one in New York City, but in the end, Yale was the best fit. And so he generously found another job, worked with a consultancy firm, and we moved to New Haven, where I had 3 years of tremendous fun and really blossoming. Enjoyed myself very much. I was a section leader in the choir and discovered how much I just loved pastoral work and the language side of it and the learning, the academic side of being formed as a priest. In 1997, I was ordained as a deacon, transitional deacon, in New Hampshire by Doug Thurner, my bishop. At that time, Jean Robinson was the canon to the ordinary in New Hampshire. And I was called to serve the Church of Grace Church in Alexandria, Virginia, as assistant rector and then associate rector. And enjoyed that so much that I stayed longer than any curate should, and stayed for 6 years. It was a church with a worship style very much like St. Paul's, but a little bit more so, a little bit more choreography, a little bit more smoke, believe it or not, a little bit more chanting. But I learned the repertoire. I think of it as my tool belt was well equipped liturgically. and we had very good 6 years at Grace Church. It has that combination of high church worship with liberal theology and politics, which was one of the reasons I felt so drawn to St. Paul's. My formation as a priest was a steady process of opening. One of the things I did at seminary was to work at an interfaith agency in downtown New Haven and organize the interfaith Thanksgiving service. I learned something about interchurch politics from that, trying to get everybody involved. And I also worked at a transitional housing program in New Haven, which was set up for people who had HIV or AIDS and were homeless and were transitioning back into taking care of themselves. And all of the clients, in addition to having HIV/AIDS, were either addicted or mentally ill, or both, usually both. And that was a population that I'd never come across before, and it was very scary, and it was a huge learning experience for me to work with those people. The first funeral I ever conducted was a graveside service on Tuesday of Holy Week for one of the residents of that program. And the only people who came were his fellow residents. His family had long ago disowned him. The lawyer who was assigned to handle his affairs bought the cheapest casket he could possibly find. And that stands for me as a milestone in my formation as a priest, to have had that privilege. And in Holy Week of all times. So, I'm sorry, skipping back and forth a little bit, but I started looking at Grace Church. After a couple of years, I started to discern where I might go next, and there were a number of searches that didn't end in me being called elsewhere. I learned that any search process, any discernment process is worthwhile if you put yourself wholly into it. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is. If you are honestly listening and honestly sharing, not only does the candidate learn something about themselves, but the search committee can also learn something about themselves. And I discovered the wonderful moments of asking a question of a search committee and seeing them go, oh, nobody's ever asked that before. And that was fun. So I wasn't downhearted when I wasn't called to these different places. And then ultimately, through some strange circumstances, which I'm not going to get into, initial denial and then a process falling apart, I was invited into the process at St. Francis in Great Falls, which is in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. It's to the northwest of Alexandria. It's right on the Potomac. If you're a kayaker, you might be aware of the Great Falls. It's an extraordinary gorge that goes through the Potomac just upstream of Washington. And the church was in the little village of Great Falls, a mile as the crow flies from the actual falls. And I was called to serve as rector, and I started my ministry there on April 1st, 2003. Having been ordained priest on Groundhog Day, the feast of the presentation, I now became the April Fool's rector. 4 months after I began my ministry at St. Francis, a general convention was in session and Jean Robinson was confirmed as Bishop of New Hampshire, and the honeymoon ended abruptly. It's a diverse congregation theologically, but on the whole it's a conservative community, and we had some very difficult conversations and difficult times in the 6 months following that decision of General Convention. But ultimately the vestry said, we've talked about this enough, we're going to move on. And so we did. We lost a handful of families, which hurt. It's a middle-sized Episcopal church, about 240 families, but with very strong friendships among the congregants. And so when people left, it really hurt. And Fairfax County, you may know, was at the epicenter of the schismatic activity following Jean's confirmation. And we lost 11 churches in the Diocese of Virginia, 2 of the largest and oldest, Truro Church and the Falls Church. And it's been extremely painful. And as we went through that process, I was elected to the Standing Committee of the Diocese of Virginia. And it fell to me as one of those 12 people, plus the bishop, to sign the depositions, the defrockings of 21 of my priestly colleagues. That was very painful, as they had abandoned the doctrine, discipline, and worship of the Episcopal Church. St. Francis flourished. We introduced some new things. I started chanting at their 11 o'clock service, which was new for them. We started an interdenominational annual choir festival, inviting in particular some of the Black Baptist churches in the area to bring their choirs, that continues. They had it last Sunday afternoon, and every year it would rock the church. I mean, a very different style of music, rather like the Zydeco Mass, but in a tamer way. And so there were a number of things. We built the music program, and in 2008, I was due for a sabbatical, and I was fortunate enough to be given a Lilly Foundation grant for my sabbatical, a clergy renewal grant. And the plan that I put together that got the grant was all about music. And we began in May of 2008, just before I went off on sabbatical, with a fully staged production of Noah's Flood. Finally. And whereas when I was 3 years old, my ambition was to be one of the tiny, tiny animals singing in the session, I was actually the voice of God. And it was wonderful. I think we did 4 performances, and the bishop came to one of them and really enjoyed it. And then off I went on my sabbatical trip, which took me back to all the places that have been important in my life, but going back as a priest. And so I celebrated the Sun Eucharist at Belfast Cathedral. It's a glorious neoclassical church with rounded arches. I presided at Eden's, or cantored at Eden's Song at Clare College with the choir that was there then. I spent a week at Wells Cathedral. There was a choral camp going on while the cathedral choir was on half term. They bring in visiting choirs, and this was a group that came together just for the week. And we sang Eden's Song every day that week. And I renewed my love, my acquaintance with the cathedral, saw some old friends. And on the Sunday morning was invited to give the blessing at the end of the service. And then at the end of that sabbatical, the last piece of the grant was to put on an ecumenical performance. I actually did 2 performances of Carl Jenkins' A Mass for Peace, The Armed Man. Does anybody know The Armed Man, Mass for Peace? Oh, and Martin just left for choir practice. Well, this is something I'm going to have to let him know about. It's an extraordinary work that was written as a response to the attack in 2001. Carl Jenkins is a very successful Welsh composer, and he draws together, it's got some non-traditional texts, including the Muslim call to prayer. It has a plain song, chanted portion of the psalm. It has settings of poems written after the Sarajevo tragedy, a portion of the Mahabharata, a poem written in response to the atomic bombs in Japan. It's a wonderful piece, and it takes a huge group, large orchestra, and a very large choir. And so we recruited from churches all the way along Georgetown Pike, where St. Francis was. And that was it was a premiere, Washington area premiere of the piece. And that led to a new tradition of ecumenical choir performances each year in that neighbourhood. And that also still continues. And I'm very grateful. The other really formative experience, I think, other than just learning to be a rector, which went on for all 10, nearly 11 years that I was there, was last April. I was able to go to South Sudan St. Francis had a long-standing relationship with the diocese in the southwest of Sudan, and with internal exiles in Juba, in the capital of South Sudan, and we've been supporting the school. And we finally had the opportunity and felt it was safe enough for 3 of us to visit last April. And we spent 4 days in Ezo, and if you know anything about the centre of Africa, which most people probably don't, there's a point where Congo and the Central African Republic and South Sudan meet. And that's where we were, right there, right on the border. And it happens to be also where the Lord's Resistance Army hangs out, which is a gang of thugs who come and terrorize neighboring communities, and had attacked this community just a couple of years before. We were able to walk across the border into the Congo. I preached at the church. They're building a cathedral, but I preached at the church in the diocesan compound. And we also spent several days in Juba visiting the school and meeting with diocesan officials. That was April, and in November of last year, the Lord's Resistance Army attacked Ezo again. And I had a very new and vivid reaction and a sense of just how isolated and how vulnerable our Christian brothers and sisters are in South Sudan. The Episcopal Church is doing great things there, the Episcopal Church of Sudan. It's one of the few institutions that is able to keep going in a very chaotic place. And it was a very formative experience for me to go there. So, what else? Let's see. My music continued in ebbs and flows throughout all these years. While I was at Grace Church and my first year or two at St. Francis, I neglected my viola. It was just too much to try and keep that up. But in 2004, with my son's permission, they were both in high school, and I decided to start playing again. I went to a chamber music camp for a week, and my technique came back miraculously, and then I joined a semi-professional orchestra and enjoyed that until I left Virginia. I'm hoping to find opportunities for chamber music and orchestral playing here once I get a sense of my schedule. Now, I need to talk about my marriage. My husband Steve, as I said, was a brilliant man, a very kind man, an extremely patient man. But he suffered from a condition which, as time went on, he was less and less able to manage, and it created a great deal of stress. And in the end, I discovered that I was going to be sick if I stayed in the marriage, just because of the stress of living with this condition. And so we ended our marriage. We did a collaborative divorce, which is a particular type of marriage ending which I recommend if you can trust each other. It takes a great deal of trust, but we were able to work through the end of our marriage with enormous support from St. Francis and from the bishops in Virginia. That was tremendously helpful. Our divorce was final in December 2011, and then in December 2012, my ex-husband, died suddenly, and that was hard for my kids and for me. But again, the church rallied around. We had a splendid funeral for him. His ashes are buried in the backyard of that church. In the middle of all that, I was in a discernment process in the Diocese of New Hampshire. They were about to elect a new bishop to succeed Jean Robinson, and I was a nominee in that election, and that took place in May of 2012. And I was not elected, evidently. And now I know why. And God had something better in mind. So there were a couple of years of a lot going on. And today, both my sons are in graduate school. They are not settled. This is the best time in my life in many ways, and it's a great time for this new adventure to come to a completely new place and to an extraordinary, healthy, vital church. Music, openness, and downtown ministry. You guys have it all, and I'm so glad to be here. A few words about my vision, my outlook, my theology. I'm very aware of being in between generations in the church. As someone in their 50s, I've hired a number of young assistants in their 20s and 30s, and they are fully millennial generation. They are completely digital. They have quite a different outlook on the world. And I was formed by a traditional church, the traditional church. But I'm very aware of how we are changing. Phyllis Tickle, if you've read any of her work, speaks of this time in the church's history as being the next Reformation. She says every 500 years, roughly, the church goes through a major change, a major Reformation, and we're at it. We're at that point again now. It's been 500 years since the Protestant Reformation. Now we have what she calls the Great Emergence. And it's a very different time. And the millennial generation, of course, are going to be the leaders of that time. And they have no patience for institutional loyalty or empty words. They want to see action. They want to see, if they're going to be part of an organization, it needs to be an organization that is changing the world. And our call is to buy into that and to make sure that we are in it with our whole hearts, our whole minds and hearts and souls. The way we will make disciples in this new age is by honestly following Jesus' call to heal and to teach and to love the people around us. Our worship offers us, I think, as Anglicans, a unique opportunity to give people the mystery that they don't find anywhere else. The transcendence that isn't to be found in a world where you can explain everything, every atom, every molecule. So we have that to offer the world, as well as our history as Anglicans of the broad umbrella of embracing many points of view. And that's something I feel sadly that those who left the Episcopal Church in protest after 2003, that I feel that they're missing out on that by narrowing the scope, by saying you aren't pure enough for us. That way, that's a very ancient heresy, and that way leads to a church of one person. Eventually, I'm the only one who's pure enough. I think that as Anglicans we have this call to be embracing, to be comprehensive, and to offer warmth and a home and a way to structure your life, your relationships in a holy way, so that we can bring people along, help them to follow Christ as we follow Christ in our broken and imperfect way, and our openness to questioning, to doubters, is extremely important in this age, because so many people now that they're grown up, they have no experience of church. And some of you remember the golden days in the 50s and 60s of the huge confirmation classes and everybody going to church, and that world doesn't exist anymore. And so we now have people coming into adulthood who have never been part of a faith community, and we need to start teaching them right from the start what it means, and not take anything for granted. And we need to be out there. And that's where Ashes to Go is a wonderful thing. We need to find ways to expand that ministry, other excuses to get out there in the streets of San Diego, and to model the love of Christ and the opportunity to receive a blessing from a God who loves everybody, no matter who you are. So I'm going to stop there and invite questions. Oh, please say your name, because I can't read the name tags from here.
I'm Barbara Perry, and thank you for this lovely story. It reminds me of a Beethoven symphony where all the discord is then reharmonized. My question is, given your background in England, where there's not the separation of church and state that you have here, I wonder what your experience of that is different, and how you envision how it should be optimal.
I don't know if you all heard that. Barbara asked, given my experience of England and the established church, how I reflect on the difference here, and how to optimize that experience and that difference. Is that right? Of course, the Church of Ireland is not established, and neither is the Episcopal Church of Scotland, where my siblings are active. And I was never really an adult in the Church of England. But when I first went for an interview with Bishop Thurner, he said, are you just coming to me to be ordained because you can't get ordained in England? And I'm not gonna, he said, I won't play that game. And it wasn't, it was a genuine call. I am very grateful not to be ordained in an established church. The Church of England is hobbled by its established status. They can't have a new prayer book without an Act of Parliament. It's still, the 1662 book is still the official book. And even though the Parliament is full of non-believers and people from other faiths, don't mess with the Book of Common Prayer, the Restoration Prayer Book. And it's also hobbled them in an evangelical way. The Church of England has been far too complacent for far too long. And because they're there for the community and available, they haven't really made any effort until recently to reach out. But there is one piece of the Church of England theology or ecclesiology that I bring with me, and that's what I've coined the phrase patch theology. England is broken up physically, geographically into parishes. So every inch of England belongs to a parish church, and the priest in that parish church is responsible for that patch of land. And in fact, the priest of that parish church is required to hatch, match, or dispatch anyone on the patch. So baptisms, marriages, and burials, they can't turn anyone away. Like that. And I bring that worldview with me. When I was in Great Falls, which is a small town, I felt that we were the church for the community, and we were the place where people came who couldn't find anywhere else to go. And particularly funerals of unchurched local personalities where there was a need. After the massacre at Virginia Tech, I'm sure you remember, 33 people were killed. We contacted the Alumni Association. Of course, we had a lot of members who had gone to Virginia Tech. We had a number of students there at the time. And we offered to host a memorial service that very evening. And luckily, we had a large field in front of the church. The church seated 240. The field was about 2 acres, and we had over 1,000 people show up and filled that field on that April evening. And I felt that that was very consonant with our call to be the church for the community. So I'm glad that we don't have to worry about the government telling us how to worship. And I'm glad that we have that separation. But I also feel that, especially as a cathedral for the city, that we do have a role in civic life and in helping all people in San Diego have a little taste of the kingdom of God.
My name is Caroline Morse. What kind of mission or being out there are you thinking about with San Diego? I realize these thoughts are just forming, but I'd like to know where your mind is going.
So Caroline asked, what kind of mission or out there am I considering? And it is very early days. We're still getting used to ashes to go. That felt rather radical. I did it for the first time last year, and I think you did too. But I'm hoping, I really want to brainstorm with you all about ways that we can make the church visible and be available to people. There's ministry that we can develop more of. I know it's already going on to the homeless in Balboa Park. There's a group that wants to bring communion to those folks. There are many institutions. We can do ministry in the detention centers, in the jail. I think we just have to be visible. We know that the most effective form of evangelism is one-on-one invitation. It's all about relationship. Now, the Christian faith is incarnational. We can have principles. I remember an old lady I used to visit in Alexandria. I think she was about 90 years old. And I would take her communion. And after about the 4th visit, she was from Georgia. She said, I don't hold with women priests, but I like you. And that's what we're about, is incarnational ministry, being one-on-one, being able to invite people, being in relationship. And that's not something just for the clergy or the cathedral staff to do, that's everybody's job. To make disciples, to invite. And I use that phrase, make disciples, from the Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel. I actually prefer the passage in Luke where Jesus sends out the disciples 2 by 2 and says, don't take a change of clothes, don't book a hotel in advance, just go and be at the mercy of the people you meet. Be vulnerable, be open, be part of their community. And that, I think, is how we need to do evangelism, is to not to be in control, but to go and be a part of people's lives in a meaningful way. And then, that might almost be accidental, but really not, because the Holy Spirit is moving, that people realize we're doing this because we are Christians. And you'll hear if you weren't at the early service, you'll hear in the sermon a little bit about how the church grew and flourished in the early centuries because of what the church did for people who needed care. And that's our call. Yes?
Not really a question, not really a question of the accent on what you're just saying there, is that in the 60s there was a popular song, there will know we are Christians by our love. And to me that's always been the greatest way of evangelizing. It's just like being with God. And no lines, no words.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. They will know we are Christians by our love. It's something that rattles around in my head, and then when I hear about the terrible things that are done in the name of the church or Christianity, I think, how do you reconcile a hateful act with that they know we are Christians by our love? And that's a mantra for us all.
Rob, what was it that first interested you in coming to St. Paul's, and what were your impressions after you made the first visit?
I'm sorry, after I made the first visit.
Your secret visit.
Oh, the secret visit. Well, the first thing was the ad online on the Episcopal News Service Daily News Digest, which simply said, San Diego Cathedral Dean. Having grown up in cathedrals, that interested me. I'd never been to San Diego, but everybody who'd ever mentioned San Diego told me that it was the perfect place to live, great climate. So those two things immediately sort of sparked a little interest. And my administrator and the dean of our region, in Virginia we have regional deans, a colleague, both drew my attention to this ad and said, have you seen it? You should look at this. That was the very first thing. Then as soon as I started looking, saw music program. That was huge. And I knew it was time for something. I had been somewhat unsettled since the Episcopal election. And anyone I talked to said, oh, you have much more fun as a dean than you do as a bishop. And I was ready to let go of the bishop thing anyway. And then when I visited, it was November, and it was 80 degrees and sunny. I was overdressed, of course, because I was dressed for interviews. But the warmth of the people I met, the reinforcement of what's going on here, seeing everything, the signs, the notices, the organ, the incredible organ that's just been renovated. I just watched the DVD last night, the Tour Bus DVD. It's great fun. And oddly enough, there were things that I picked up on. Initially, when I read the profile, I thought, well, this place is nirvana. Everything's going right. What is there to do? And the search committee, when I had the Skype interview, said, no, there are things that you could do that need to be done. And I picked up on a few things that I thought, well, okay, there is something to be done here. And And one of them, there was the financial records are in the process of being cleaned up. And as a former programmer, while I'm not an accountant, I'm not a mathematician, unlike my younger son, I'm not afraid of details and numbers, and I'm not afraid of a large machine. And the complexity of this place intrigued me. I've served 2 churches that had multiple pieces to them, preschools or day schools, Latino congregations, and this was just a bigger version of that. And so the complexity of it interested me. It's an intellectual challenge and puzzle that I would welcome, and I approach large problems, challenges, by breaking them down into pieces and working on them a piece at a time. And I felt that it would be good for my brain to have this kind of challenge in a place that when I visited with the bishop on my secret visit, he said this is a very healthy congregation, and that was really good to hear, because healthy churches cannot be taken for granted. Unfortunately, there are many dysfunctional churches out there, and so what could be better than a cathedral with a great music program in an urban setting, with a perfect climate and a healthy congregation? I mean, what more is there to wish for? Yes. Will I be doing pastoral work? I hope I'll be doing pastoral work. I'm aware that the position of dean of a large church like this becomes very administrative, but I have a heart for pastoral work, and I do want to. I'm initially probably focusing on the clergy and the staff and the chapter, but I do want to be available pastorally, and I definitely want to invite you to make appointments and come and chat with me and just let me know, tell me something about your life and let me in.
I want to ask, where do you see the role of cathedral and you as a head of the cathedral being as far as ecumenical efforts within San Diego?
Thank you. Where do I see us going ecumenically? I'm very interested in ecumenical and interfaith relationships, and as I mentioned, it goes back to seminary days. I've been involved in interfaith and ecumenical ministries throughout my ordained ministry, and so I hope that we can strengthen relationships and develop relationships with the other churches, with the Jewish and Muslim communities as well. I think it's critical that we work towards unity, at least unity of purpose, if not unity of theology. I think there's a lot we can do, and that's one of the places I see an opportunity. I think you're supposed to stop at 10 o'clock, is that right? Yes. Oh, there. One more question, perhaps. Wait. Who's? Sorry, over there, yes.
Now, there's the Episcopal Community Service here in National City that's about 86 years old. They have branches like Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, Baltimore.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's a local organization, but I'm not the person. I'm seeing a nod. It's a local organization. I think there are equivalent organizations around the country. Okay, that was a short one. Pat, why not?
We are really learning and building youth programs and godly planning. And what is your experience with building a youth program?
As the assistant / associate at Grace Church, I was in charge of the youth programs and introduced the Journey to Adulthood youth philosophy, really. It's bigger than a program, and then introduced it also at St. Francis. I think it's a wonderful program, and I've taken the godly play training and love godly play, and especially love watching adults be drawn into godly play. So I hope to be able to offer some assistance with the youth. At the pancake breakfast last Sunday, there were a number of tables set up, and you wanted me to talk to the youth. So I said, well, I'll just come and have breakfast with the youth, and apparently that won me a lot of points for teenagers. I enjoy hanging out with teenagers. My sons are both in their 20s now, but I was surprised by how much I enjoyed them as teenagers, and they don't scare me. Well, thank you all very much.